I attended my parents' anniversary, and finding out my brother unalived my girlfriend and my entire family covered it up for 10 years. My whole family saw it as the right thing to do and gave out to me for being upset. So I had to resort to measures I never have before. So here's the story of how my brother accidentally on purpose unalived my girlfriend and my whole family covered it up for a decade, which I just found out about at my parents' 40th anniversary dinner last month. It sounds like something out of a TV show, but unfortunately it's my real life now. I guess I should start at the beginning. My parents, Pat and Carol, were celebrating 40 years of marriage at our family lake house, the one we've had since we were kids. It's this rustic two-story place on Lake Winnipesaukee that Dad bought back in the 80s when property was actually affordable. Me, 35 female, my older brother Tyler, 38, and my younger brother Marcus, 32, had been planning this big weekend for months. Like, we had a shared Google Doc and everything with assignments and timelines because Tyler is super type A like that. We rented a huge table and those fancy white chairs, strung up all these lights, and even hired a caterer because none of us can cook worth a damn. Seriously, the last time I tried making pasta, I somehow set off the smoke alarm. Mom and Dad arrived on Friday afternoon and seemed genuinely surprised by all the effort we'd put in. Mom actually teared up when she saw the table setting, which made me feel both proud and kind of sad that our family doesn't do nice things for each other more often. We had this big dinner planned for Saturday night with champagne and a custom cake with their wedding photo printed on it. The bakery had somehow managed to recreate their 1983 wedding photo in fondant, which was both impressive and slightly terrifying. Everything was going fine at first. We were eating the fancy dinner, making these dumb toasts about their marriage, looking at old photo albums, all that nice family stuff you're supposed to do. Tyler had put together this slideshow of old family photos that had everyone laughing at our terrible 90s fashion choices. The problem started when Marcus hit the champagne way too hard. He's always been the problem child in our family, constantly in some kind of trouble, always needing bailing out of something, but we've all just gotten used to it over the years. Like when he got kicked out of college for selling exam answers, or when he borrowed grandma's car and crashed it into a Wendy's drive-thru sign. So anyway, Marcus is on his 5th or 6th class, and he starts getting that look on his face. If you have a drunk in your family, you know the look. That sloppy, emotional expression that means they're about to say something really inappropriate. I caught Tyler's eye across the table, and we had that silent sibling communication thing where we both knew trouble was brewing. Tyler tried to distract everyone by suggesting we cut the cake, but Marcus was already on a roll, mumbling something about carrying this for too long and can't take the guilt anymore. Mom looked uncomfortable, adjusting her new anniversary necklace that Dad had given her earlier. Dad seemed annoyed, checking his watch like he always does when he's stressed, and Tyler was desperately trying to change the subject, but Marcus just kept going, slurring his words and getting louder by the second. Then he just said it, right as Mom and Dad were cutting into their anniversary cake. He looked directly at me and slurred, "I killed Zoe. I switched her meds. I killed your girlfriend." The room went completely silent. You could literally hear the ice melting in the water glasses. I thought I must have misheard him. Zoe had been my girlfriend 10 years ago. We'd met in grad school and dated for 3 years before the accident. She had narcolepsy and died in a car accident when she fell asleep at the wheel. She was only 24, with her whole life ahead of her. It was devastating, and I spent years in therapy dealing with the loss. I still keep a photo of her on my bookshelf, which Marcus has complained about during past visits to my apartment. Marcus kept talking, explaining through his drunken tears that he'd replaced Zoe's narcolepsy medication with over-the-counter sleep aids because she had convinced me not to invest in his business venture. It was some ridiculous pyramid scheme selling protein supplements that he swore would make us all rich. He needed my money, and when Zoe talked me out of it, he decided to get revenge, as if murdering someone over $5,000 was a proportional response. I couldn't process what was happening. My ears started ringing and the room seemed to spin. I literally collapsed onto the floor while Dad stormed out of the room, knocking over his chair in the process, and Mom just sat there frozen, still holding the cake server like a statue. Tyler stood between us looking like he'd seen a ghost. In that moment, I realized our whole family dynamic for the past 20 years had been built on this horrible secret. All those uncomfortable silences at holidays, the way everyone got weird whenever I mentioned Zoe, how Marcus would leave the room whenever I talked about the accident, it all suddenly made terrible sense. The next 2 weeks were a blur. I went back to my apartment in the city and basically just existed in a fog of grief and betrayal. My neighbor Kathy kept checking on me, bringing casseroles I never ate and offering to walk my dog, which was nice of her even though I don't have a dog. I ignored calls from everyone in my family, took a leave from work, and mostly just stared at old photos of Zoe, trying to process that her death wasn't an accident, but deliberate sabotage by my own brother. I kept having these vivid flashbacks to Zoe's funeral, where Marcus had awkwardly patted my shoulder and said, "Sometimes bad things just happen." Knowing now that he had made the bad thing happen made me physically ill. One day I came home from a walk to find Tyler sitting outside my building. I almost turned around and left, but he spotted me and looked so pathetic that I reluctantly let him up to my apartment. He kept trying to make small talk about the weather and my houseplants while I just stared at him, wondering if he'd also known all along. He tried to talk about what happened, but I refused to engage. I just moved around my apartment cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, making tea I didn't drink, basically anything to avoid the conversation. I remember aggressively dusting my TV while he sat there looking miserable in my IKEA armchair. Eventually, Tyler left a letter on my counter and said to read it when I was ready. After he left, curiosity got the better of me and I opened it immediately, my hands shaking so much I nearly tore the paper. The letter was worse than I could have imagined. Tyler explained that he'd helped Marcus after Zoe's death by staging the scene to look like a simple medication error rather than deliberate tampering. They'd gone to her apartment while I was at the hospital identifying her body and replaced the tampered medication with her regular pills. Tyler wrote that he'd convinced himself it was a one-time mistake that Marcus would learn from, not realizing he was enabling a pattern of destructive behavior that would continue for years. I was so angry I tore the letter into tiny pieces and threw them in the trash. Then I retrieved them, burned them in my kitchen sink, and flushed the ashes. Then I called my parents for the first time since the anniversary disaster. Mom answered, sounding exhausted. Her voice had that raspy quality it gets when she's been crying for days. I asked her point blank if she'd known anything about Zoe's death. After a long pause, she admitted she'd had suspicions questions about the accident report, but convinced herself she was being paranoid. She said Dad had dismissed her concerns as overactive imagination, which was his favorite way of shutting down conversations he didn't want to have. That conversation made me realize my parents might have been willfully ignorant all this time. The next day, I decided I needed to visit Zoe's parents. We'd lost touch after the funeral. It was too painful for all of us, but they deserved to know the truth. I was terrified they'd hate me because of what my brother did, so I asked my friend Jamie to come with me for support. Jamie has been my rock since college, and she immediately took off work to drive me there. No questions asked. The Patels still lived in the same house in the suburbs, with the same rose bushes Zoe had helped her father plant along the walkway. When Mrs. Patel opened the door, she recognized me immediately, and her face showed such a mix of surprise and old pain. I managed to explain why I was there, but when I told her the truth about Zoe's death, she literally collapsed. It was like watching someone break in slow motion. Mr. Patel called an ambulance while I sat there feeling like the worst person in the world. We followed them to the hospital, and while Mrs. Patel was being examined, Mr. Patel confronted me in the waiting room. He wanted to know why I'd kept this secret for years. I explained through tears that I'd only learned the truth at my parents' anniversary party 2 weeks ago. He studied my face for a moment before nodding, saying he believed me. Then he told me something that broke my heart all over again. They'd never gotten closure because the accident never made sense to them. Zoe had been so careful about her medication. She had daily pill organizers and phone alarms and never missed a dose. They'd always felt there was something wrong with the official story but couldn't prove anything. After leaving the hospital, I became determined to confront Marcus face to face. I called Tyler and discovered Marcus had fled to our uncle's hunting cabin after the anniversary disaster. It's this remote little place in the mountains with spotty cell service and more taxidermied deer heads than is comfortable. I convinced Tyler to drive me there immediately, though he tried to make excuses about work deadlines and his wife expecting him home. During the 3-hour drive, Tyler kept defending his role in the cover-up, saying he was just trying to protect our brother and our family. He said he'd been 28 at the time and panicked when Marcus called him crying about what he'd done. I countered that their protection had only enabled Marcus's worst behaviors over the years, pointing out incident after incident where he'd escaped consequences. By the time we reached the cabin, we'd both realized how our family's toxic dynamics had contributed to this tragedy. The cabin was a mess when we arrived. Marcus was drunk, surrounded by empty bottles, and had clearly not showered in days. His beard had grown and patchy, and he smelled like someone who had given up on basic hygiene. When he saw us, he started crying and saying things about ending it all. Neither of us knew how to handle the situation, so Tyler called our parents despite my objections. I wanted to handle this between the three of us, but Tyler insisted our parents needed to be there. Pat and Dad arrived a few hours later, creating this bizarre family intervention scene. Everyone started blaming each other. Mom blamed Dad for being too hard on Marcus. Dad blamed Mom for babying him. Tyler blamed himself for the cover-up, and I blamed all of them for keeping me in the dark. Through all this, Marcus revealed more details about his resentment towards Zoe, saying she was controlling my financial decisions. I pointed out that I had made my own choice not to invest in his half-baked business scheme, and Zoe had simply agreed with me. That's when I realized Marcus had a disturbing pattern of never taking responsibility for his actions. He always found someone else to blame. Teachers who had it out for him, bosses who didn't recognize his potential, girlfriends who were too demanding. Mom tried to comfort Marcus like she always did, treating him like a child instead of a grown man who had committed murder. She was literally stroking his hair while he sobbed about how hard this was for him, but surprisingly, Dad finally stood up to both of them, saying this pattern couldn't continue. It was the first time I'd ever seen the family alliances shift. Dad had always backed Mom in defending Marcus, but something had finally broken in him. I asked Marcus if he'd ever felt genuine remorse for killing Zoe, or if he was just sorry he got caught. His response was telling. He could only express regret for the current situation, not for taking a life. He kept saying things like, if I could go back and change things, but never actually acknowledged the gravity of what he'd done. That's when I announced I was going to the police regardless of what anyone else wanted. The family protection racket was over. Marcus immediately turned to Tyler, begging him to stop me like he had 10 years ago. But Tyler refused, saying he was done enabling Marcus. I saw genuine shame in Tyler's eyes, which gave me a tiny bit of hope that at least one family member might be capable of growth. That's when Marcus threatened to reveal other family secrets if we didn't protect him, which just confirmed he was still the same manipulative person. Over the next few days, I started the process of going to the police, but quickly discovered there might be issues with the statute of limitations. The detective I spoke with, a tired-looking woman named Officer Rivera, wasn't sure if they could make a case after so much time had passed without physical evidence. The medication bottles were long gone, and the car had been scrapped years ago, so I shifted my focus to gathering evidence of Marcus's confession. I started recording our family conversations, legal in my state with one-party consent, and documenting the timeline of events. Meanwhile, Tyler was searching through old emails and texts that might incriminate Marcus. Instead, he found evidence that our father had helped clean up after the medication swap. There were text messages where Dad told Marcus to get rid of anything suspicious and stick to the story we discussed. When Tyler confronted Dad about this, Dad justified his actions as protecting his son. Tyler pointed out that they hadn't protected anyone. They'd enabled a killer and prevented justice for Zoe. Dad broke down, admitting he'd been carrying this guilt for years. He confessed that he'd almost come clean several times but couldn't bear the thought of Marcus going to prison. I went to my childhood home when my parents weren't there to search for anything that might help build a case. Being in my old bedroom felt weird, like I was 16 again, but on some bizarre mission. In Mom's closet, I found a hidden diary where she'd written about her suspicions immediately after Zoe's accident. There were entries questioning the police report and noting Marcus's strange behavior at the funeral. When I confronted her with the diary, she defended her silence as necessary for keeping the family together. She actually used the phrase, "families stick together," as if that justified covering up a murder. That's when I realized my parents had prioritized maintaining a perfect family image over justice for an innocent young woman. Things got more complicated when Marcus reached out to his old friend Drew, who worked at a pharmaceutical company. Marcus wanted help covering his tracks, but Drew refused to get involved. Marcus then threatened to expose Drew's past theft of prescription drugs, which could cost Drew his medical license. Drew called me to warn me about the blackmail attempt, but said he was afraid to testify. He sounded genuinely frightened on the phone, his voice shaking as he explained how Marcus had dirt on everyone in his life. I promised to protect him if he would share conversations he'd had with Marcus after Zoe's death. We arranged arranged a dinner at Tyler's house to discuss next steps, but Marcus unexpectedly brought our cousin Daisy as moral support. Daisy has always been Marcus's biggest defender in the family, ever since they were kids pulling pranks together. This made everyone guarded, so nothing productive came from the dinner. Afterward, Daisy pulled me aside and revealed something shocking. Marcus had confessed to her years ago about tampering with Zoe's medication, but she'd been too afraid of family rejection to come forward. She'd been carrying this knowledge for 8 years, attending family gatherings and watching me grieve while knowing the truth. I realized then how our family's dynamics had silenced potential whistleblowers. When I confronted Marcus about confessing to Daisy, he denied everything and called her mentally unstable. He claimed she had been in love with him for years and made up stories for attention. I secretly recorded this conversation as evidence of his pattern of deception. Around the same time, Tyler discovered financial records showing Marcus had stolen money from our grandmother to fund his failing business. He'd forged her signature on checks totaling nearly $20,000 before she died, money she had been saving for her grandchildren's education. Tyler wasn't sure whether to add this to Marcus's growing list of offenses and consulted with me. I insisted on complete transparency going forward, though I worried about our parents' health under all this stress. Mom had already started taking anxiety medication, and Dad's blood pressure was through the roof. Marcus tried to reconcile with me by offering money as compensation for Zoe's death. He literally pulled out his checkbook at a coffee shop and asked how much it would take to make this go away. I was disgusted by his attempt to buy forgiveness and cut off all direct communication with him. I left him sitting there with his stupid checkbook open, not even bothering to respond. Our Aunt Isabella found out what was happening and tried to arrange a family meeting, but her bias toward protecting Marcus was obvious. She kept referring to the situation as a misunderstanding and suggested therapy instead of legal action. The meeting quickly dissolved into factions forming within our extended family, with some supporting my quest for justice and others believing we should handle it privately. I decided to reach out to Zoe's brother Toby with the truth and discovered he'd been independently investigating his sister's death for years. He'd never believed the accident explanation and had compiled a folder of inconsistencies in the reports. We agreed to combine our efforts to expose Marcus. When we met, Toby showed me his investigation board like something out of a detective show, with photos and strings connecting events. Toby and I met at a coffee shop to share information, but we were spotted by Marcus's friend Blake, who immediately told Marcus I was working with Zoe's family. Marcus panicked and tried to empty his bank accounts, presumably to flee the country, but his transactions triggered a fraud alert and his accounts were temporarily frozen. Then he tried to sell family heirlooms for quick cash, including Grandma's antique silver that was supposed to be split among all the grandchildren. Tyler caught him and intervened. Marcus got so frustrated he physically attacked Tyler, though thankfully Tyler wasn't seriously hurt, just a black eye and some bruised ribs. Tyler refused to press charges but insisted Marcus get professional help. Marcus reluctantly agreed to see a therapist as a show of good faith, though I doubted his sincerity. I've seen him fake remorse too many times before, like when he crashed Dad's car in high school and cried until the punishment was reduced. As it turned out, Marcus's therapist recognized signs of sociopathic behavior, but couldn't warn us directly because of patient confidentiality. She could only encourage Marcus to be honest with his family. She later told me, after everything came out, that she'd been trying to signal the seriousness of the situation without breaking ethical guidelines. Meanwhile, I lost my job after missing too many days dealing with all this family drama. My boss, who had initially been understanding, called me in for a meeting where he explained that the company needed reliability. My boss offered a leave of absence instead of termination, which gave me time to focus on resolving the situation with Zoe's family. I applied for unemployment benefits to cover my bills while dealing with the legal aspects of the case. Then Dad suffered a minor heart attack from the stress. He collapsed during breakfast while arguing with Mom about Marcus. During his recovery in the hospital, he refused to blame Marcus, which made Mom increasingly resentful of me for causing Dad's condition by pushing for the truth. The nurses had to repeatedly ask Mom to lower her voice when she was yelling at me in the cardiac care unit. When I tried to visit Dad in the hospital, Mom attempted to prevent me from seeing him, forcing Tyler to intervene. He physically placed himself between us in the hospital corridor, telling Mom she couldn't control who visited Dad. While Dad was recovering, I found old letters revealing he'd once suspected Marcus had serious psychological issues as a teenager, but had ignored recommendations for treatment. There was correspondence from Marcus's high school counselor urging psychiatric evaluation after Marcus had tortured a neighbor's cat. When I confronted Dad about enabling Marcus, he acknowledged his mistakes, but begged me not to destroy what was left of our family. He looked so frail in his hospital gown, hooked up to monitors. I felt torn between justice for Zoe and loyalty to my parents. Marcus visited Dad in the hospital, playing the devoted son role, but used the opportunity to steal Dad's medication, raising concerns about his deteriorating mental state. A nurse noticed the missing pills during her rounds and reviewed the security footage, which clearly showed Marcus pocketing the pills while pretending to straighten Dad's bedside table. Tyler installed security cameras at our parents' house without telling them, but Marcus discovered and disabled them, increasing everyone's paranoia about his intentions. He left a note saying, "Nice try," taped to one of the disabled cameras, like this was all some kind of game to him. I decided to invite Zoe's parents to meet with my parents, hoping for some kind of reconciliation. Mrs. Patel had recovered from her collapse but looked years older than when I'd last seen her. Instead of reconciliation, both families became emotional and accusatory, ending with deeper wounds than before. Dad accused the Patels of dragging up the past, while Mr. Patel called our family accessories to murder. The strain caused Mom to reveal she'd considered leaving Dad multiple times over the years, but couldn't bear splitting the family. She said she'd packed her bags 3 times after major incidents with Marcus, but always unpacked them secretly when everyone was asleep. This exposed the facade of their perfect marriage we'd just celebrated at the anniversary party. Marcus approached me offering what appeared to be genuine remorse, coming to my apartment unannounced with tears in his eyes and a photo of Zoe he claimed to have kept all these years. But I discovered he was recording our conversation, presumably to edit later for his own purposes. I found the phone hidden in his jacket pocket when he went to use my bathroom. This shattered any hope I had for his redemption. I told Tyler about Marcus's deceptive recording attempt, but he was distracted by problems in his own marriage caused by our family drama. His wife Michelle was fed up with the constant crisis calls and middle-of-the-night emergency meetings. I realized everyone's lives were unraveling, simultaneously because of Marcus's actions and the years of deception that followed. Michelle complained that they hadn't had a date night in months because Tyler was always dealing with family business. Tyler's wife Michelle threatened separation if he didn't distance himself from the family chaos. She gave him an ultimatum after he missed their anniversary dinner to bail Marcus out of another self-created crisis. Tyler felt responsible for both me and Marcus, creating an impossible choice between his marriage and family obligations. He started having anxiety attacks, which he'd never experienced before. Then Marcus tried to manipulate Michelle by telling her partial truths about the situation, suggesting Tyler had been more involved in the cover-up than he admitted. She recognized his manipulation tactics and became an unexpected ally to me. She'd always seen through Marcus's charm, even when the rest of the family fell for it. Michelle shared disturbing texts from Marcus with me, but worried about the legal implications of getting involved. The text showed Marcus threatening to reveal what really happened if Tyler didn't continue supporting him financially. We consulted with a lawyer friend about our options. The lawyer advised that criminal charges might be difficult given the time that had passed, but suggested the Patel family could pursue a civil case for wrongful death. He explained that the burden of proof was lower in civil court. I reconnected with Toby to discuss this option. Toby said his parents were hesitant to endure a lengthy legal battle, but he personally was determined to see Marcus face consequences. We began documenting evidence independently, creating backup copies of everything in case Marcus tried to interfere. Marcus discovered our evidence collection efforts and broke into my apartment to destroy key documents. I came home to find my place ransacked, with particular attention paid to my desk where I'd kept Zoe's original journals. I moved temporarily into Tyler's guest room for safety. Living in close quarters, Tyler and I rebuilt our sibling bond, but Michelle grew increasingly uncomfortable with the arrangement, creating new tension in Tyler's household. She would make passive-aggressive comments about groceries and bathroom schedules, clearly resenting my presence but trying to be supportive of Tyler. Dad returned home from the hospital and called a family meeting to resolve the situation, but insisted that protecting Marcus should be the priority. He actually suggested we all apologize to Marcus for ganging up on him and then pretend none of this had happened. I walked out, feeling betrayed by my father again. I couldn't believe he was still trying to sweep things under the rug after everything that had happened. Mom secretly met with me to understand my perspective, but admitted she was afraid of losing Marcus if the family didn't support him. She brought a photo album of Marcus as a child, as if reminding me of his cute childhood pictures would somehow make his actions less horrific. This revealed the depth of emotional manipulation Marcus had achieved over the years. I showed Mom evidence of Marcus's lifelong pattern of manipulation, but she refused to see the truth. She literally covered her ears during parts of our conversation. I realized then that my mother would never choose justice over protecting her favorite son. Tyler's marriage reached a breaking point when Michelle found Marcus hiding in their garage. Marcus claimed he was just collecting his belongings, creating doubt about his true intentions. Michelle found him at 2 a.m. rummaging through storage boxes, which seemed suspicious no matter how he tried to explain it. I organized a family therapy session with a trauma specialist, but Marcus convinced our parents not to attend. The therapist could only help Tyler and me process our feelings. She suggested that our parents' behavior indicated they might never be able to acknowledge the full truth because it threatened their self-image as good parents. During therapy, Tyler admitted he had witnessed Marcus tampering with Zoe's medication, but had been too afraid to stop him. This revelation of his own guilt in the tragedy was difficult for me to hear. Tyler broke down completely, sobbing as he described watching Marcus replace pills in Zoe's medication container, but being too afraid of confrontation to say anything. I struggled to forgive Tyler's inaction but recognized his genuine remorse, unlike Marcus. We made a pact to hold Marcus accountable regardless of family pressure. The therapist suggested we focus on what we could control rather than trying to change our parents' perspective. Tyler and I approached Marcus's employer with evidence of his confession, but discovered he had already resigned, claiming family health issues. We realized he was systematically cutting ties in preparation for something. His apartment had been sublet, and his social media accounts were suddenly deleted. Around this time, Toby published an anonymous blog post about his sister's death and the family cover-up, avoiding naming names but creating public interest. The blog post spread through our community quickly, with people speculating about which local family was involved. Marcus convinced our parents it was defamation, and Dad hired a lawyer to investigate shutting down the blog. I had to reveal to my parents that I had provided information for the blog, explaining it as necessary for healing and forcing them to confront their role in protecting a killer. Dad canceled the lawyer after realizing the truth in the blog, but Mom became increasingly isolated in her defense of Marcus, creating the first serious rift in their 40-year marriage. They started sleeping in separate bedrooms and barely speaking to each other. Marcus attempted to flee the country with cash and fake identification, but Tyler discovered his plan through bank notifications, and I anonymously alerted customs officials. When Marcus was stopped at the airport, he called me begging for help. He was crying on the phone about how he just wanted to take a vacation to clear his head. I refused to rescue him this time, and he threatened to reveal more family secrets if abandoned. He told me Tyler had once covered up a drunk driving accident in college, but investigation proved this claim false, demonstrating Marcus's desperation to shift blame to others. Tyler had never even been in an accident. It was pure fabrication. I arranged for Marcus to meet with Zoe's parents for closure, but he arrived intoxicated and belligerent, confirming to everyone his lack of genuine remorse. He started accusing the Patels of being money hungry and trying to cash in on their daughter's death. During this disastrous meeting, Mr. Patel suffered an emotional breakdown. The older man, who had maintained his composure through everything else, finally broke down sobbing when Marcus suggested Zoe had been asking for trouble by not being more careful with her medication. Surprisingly, this human display of grief finally seemed to penetrate Marcus's defenses, triggering his first moment of genuine shame. He'd never seemed to understand the real human impact of his actions until he witnessed Mr. Patel's raw pain. That night, Marcus attempted suicide by overdosing on pills. Tyler found him in time, and he was rushed to the hospital. This forced our family to face the reality of Marcus's untreated mental health issues. The doctors pumped his stomach and placed him on a 72-hour psychiatric hold. The doctors recommended long-term psychiatric care, but insurance wouldn't cover the treatment. The facility they recommended cost $30,000 per month, completely out of reach for most people. Dad agreed to cash out his retirement to pay for Marcus's treatment, but Mom believed Marcus was being manipulative again, creating further division in how our parents responded to the crisis. Dad was willing to sacrifice their financial security, while Mom thought the suicide attempt was just another manipulation tactic. While visiting Marcus in the hospital, I discovered he had been recording conversations with his doctors and using them to learn what responses would get him released faster. I found his phone hidden under his pillow with the recording app running during a therapy session. This confirmed my suspicions about his insincerity. Tyler confronted Marcus with evidence of his manipulation, but Marcus had what appeared to be a genuine breakdown, leaving us uncertain whether he was finally facing reality or performing again. He started sobbing uncontrollably and banging his head against the wall, requiring sedation from the hospital staff. The local news picked up the story after Toby's blog went viral, but presented it as unverified allegations. A reporter named Kristen Chen started investigating the story, interviewing people in our community about rumors they'd heard. I decided to go on record with my account. I gave an interview detailing Marcus's confession, but the reporter questioned why our family had concealed it for years, forcing me to confront my own complicity in the silence. I hadn't known about the murder, but I had ignored other warning signs about Marcus's character over the years. After the interview aired, I faced public backlash for my silence, but received unexpected support from Zoe's extended family. Her cousins reached out on social media to express solidarity, and her aunt sent me a heartfelt letter saying Zoe would be proud of me for seeking the truth. This gave me strength to continue speaking the truth despite the consequences. My parents' friends began distancing themselves after the news broke, but their neighbor Daisy remained supportive, showing my elderly parents who their true friends were. Daisy brought over casseroles and helped Mom with errands when she was too emotionally exhausted to drive. Marcus's former colleagues came forward with stories of his manipulative behavior over the years, though some defended him as misunderstood, creating a public debate about his character. One coworker described how Marcus had taken credit for her project, while another defended him as just ambitious. My boss offered my job back after seeing the full context of my absences, but required me to keep family drama separate from work. This meant I had to carefully balance accountability and privacy. I agreed to his terms, grateful to have my income back even with the restrictive conditions. Tyler's construction business lost contracts due to the family association, but a longtime client named Chad stood by him, giving Tyler hope his career could survive. Chad even referred new clients to Tyler, saying character should matter more than family scandals. Marcus's therapist recommended transferring him to a specialized facility for personality disorders, but the facility had a 6-month waiting list, leaving our family responsible for his supervision in the interim. None of us felt equipped to handle his needs, especially with the new understanding of his manipulative tendencies. Tyler and I arranged a rotation to monitor Marcus, but our careers made constant supervision impossible, so we had to trust our parents with some responsibility. Mom seemed determined to prove Marcus had changed, while Dad became increasingly withdrawn, spending hours in his workshop alone. Marcus appeared to make progress in therapy, but his journal entries, which I discovered accidentally, revealed continued manipulation, confirming recovery would be a long, uncertain road. He'd written things like, "Tell them what they want to hear, and act remorseful until this blows over," making it clear he was just playing along. Zoe's parents filed a civil lawsuit against Marcus for wrongful death, but included Mom and Dad as defendants for the cover-up. This forced my parents to legally oppose their former friends. They'd once been close, even vacationing together when Zoe and I were dating. The lawsuit created media attention around the case, with local newspapers running headlines about the decade-long deception. Marcus's lawyers attempted to portray him as mentally unfit to stand trial, potentially allowing him to avoid financial responsibility. They submitted psychiatric evaluations suggesting he couldn't distinguish right from wrong. I testified truthfully at the deposition, but my testimony implicated my parents in the aftermath, creating another rift in my relationship with them. Mom refused to speak to me for weeks after my deposition, saying I had chosen strangers over family. Community members organized a memorial service for Zoe on the anniversary of her death. It was held at her former university, where they dedicated a bench with her name. Marcus attempted to attend for appearances, causing a confrontation at the service. Several of Zoe's friends physically blocked him from entering, creating a scene that overshadowed the memorial. During this confrontation, Marcus finally broke down with what appeared to be genuine remorse. Standing there, rejected by everyone, he seemed to finally understand the magnitude of what he'd done. I remained skeptical of his sincerity, but acknowledged his pain while maintaining emotional distance. I've been fooled too many times before to accept a public display as definitive proof of change. The Patels offered to settle the lawsuit if Marcus would make a public admission of guilt, but Marcus initially refused, prolonging the legal battle. He claimed a public admission would destroy his future employment prospects, as if that should be the primary concern. Tyler convinced Marcus that settlement was his best option, but Marcus demanded the family share the financial burden, creating tension over who should bear responsibility. He actually created a spreadsheet allocating percentages of the settlement to different family members, which I found incredibly offensive. Dad agreed to sell the vacation home to help with the settlement, but Mom refused to sign the papers, revealing the depth of denial still present in our family. The lake house had been in our family for generations, and Mom couldn't bear to part with it, even to help resolve the situation Marcus had created. I offered my savings to contribute to the settlement, but insisted Marcus must publicly take full responsibility, establishing accountability as my priority. I'd been saving for a down payment on a house, but justice seemed more important than my real estate plans. Marcus finally agreed to the settlement terms but demanded maintaining his current lifestyle, demonstrating his continued self-centeredness. He actually tried to negotiate keeping his luxury car while asking the family to cover his legal costs. Our family met with the Patel's lawyers to finalize terms, but Marcus attempted last-minute changes, causing Tyler to physically remove him from the meeting. Marcus kept trying to insert clauses that would limit his public statement and protect his reputation. Without Marcus present, our families reached an agreement. The Patels were remarkably gracious, considering everything they'd been through. I insisted on a clause requiring Marcus to continue therapy, prioritizing prevention of future harm. The lawyers added a requirement for quarterly verification of ongoing treatment. Marcus reluctantly signed the final agreement, but immediately began complaining about his financial future, showing his lack of true remorse. He started calculating how quickly he could pay off his portion of the settlement and get back to normal. The settlement included a public statement acknowledging responsibility. Marcus tried to water down the language, so I threatened to withdraw my financial contribution. The final statement clearly admitted he had tampered with Zoe's medication with the intention of causing harm. Marcus read the agreed statement at a press conference, but his delivery seemed mechanical and rehearsed, generating mixed public reactions. Some people appreciated the admission, while others commented on his apparent lack of emotional connection to his words. After the press conference, Marcus faced social media backlash, but used it to position himself as a victim, revealing his inability to accept consequences. He created posts about cancel culture and how difficult it was to move forward when society won't let you. My boss asked me to take a temporary leave until the public attention died down, but I refused to hide, risking my professional standing for principles. He respected my decision, but moved me to a position with less public interaction until the media interest subsided. Tyler's wife Michelle filed for separation, citing the ongoing family chaos, but agreed to counseling as a last attempt. This gave Tyler motivation to establish boundaries with our family. He started declining non-emergency calls and limited family visits to scheduled times. Dad suffered another health setback after the settlement was finalized, but refused to blame the situation on stress, finally acknowledging his role in enabling Marcus. During his hospital stay, he had meaningful conversations with his doctor about family dynamics and started to understand how his parenting had contributed to the situation. Mom joined a support group for parents of troubled adults, but struggled to admit Marcus's actions weren't just mistakes, beginning her long journey toward acceptance. She would return from meetings still defending Marcus, but gradually became more receptive to other perspectives. 6 months after the settlement, I established strict boundaries with my family, but felt guilty about distancing myself. I scheduled regular therapy to process these feelings. My therapist helped me understand that boundaries aren't rejection, but necessary protection. Tyler rebuilt his marriage by creating separation from family drama, but maintained regular check-ins with me, balancing family loyalty with his marriage. He and Michelle developed a system where family matters were discussed only during designated times, protecting their relationship from constant crisis. Marcus completed his court-mandated therapy, but immediately stopped treatment afterward, demonstrating his compliance was superficial. His therapist contacted me unofficially to express concern about his premature termination of treatment. Without treatment, Marcus's behavior deteriorated rapidly. He blamed everyone else for his problems, alienating his remaining supporters. He lost his new job after arguing with his boss, and was evicted from his apartment for disturbing neighbors with late-night outbursts. Marcus approached me claiming transformation and seeking reconciliation, but I noticed inconsistencies in his story and maintained my distance despite feeling guilty. He brought gifts and tearfully apologized, but when questioned about specific incidents, his details didn't match previous accounts. My parents celebrated their 41st anniversary with a small dinner, but the absence of their children highlighted the family fractures, forcing them to confront our new reality. What should have been a happy occasion served as a stark reminder of how much had changed in just 1 year. I sent a card but declined attending the anniversary dinner. I included a thoughtful letter explaining my feelings, offering honesty rather than pretense. I expressed love for them while maintaining my need for distance from unhealthy dynamics. Tyler attended the anniversary dinner briefly, but maintained firm boundaries about discussing Marcus, showing our parents a new family dynamic. When Mom tried to update him on Marcus's progress, Tyler politely changed the subject to their anniversary plans. Marcus showed up uninvited to the anniversary dinner intoxicated, but Dad finally stood firm in asking him to leave, showing growth in his ability to set limits. This was a significant moment for Dad, who had always capitulated to Marcus's demands in the past. Marcus retaliated by creating false social media accounts to harass family members, but got identified through IP addresses, further damaging his remaining credibility. He created fake profiles pretending to be concerned community members, but his distinctive writing style gave him away. I changed my phone number to avoid Marcus's harassment, but worried about my parents' well-being, so I arranged wellness checks through their neighbor. Daisy would text me updates after visiting them with baked goods or offers to help with yard work. Tyler and Michelle reconciled and announced they were expecting a child, but struggled with how to handle Marcus's role as an uncle, creating new family dynamics to navigate. They ultimately decided Marcus could only have supervised visits after demonstrating 6 months of stable behavior. I developed a friendship with Toby based on our shared experiences, but worried about whether it was healthy, so I proceeded cautiously while maintaining transparency. We found we had similar interests beyond our connection through Zoe, but I was careful not to let our relationship become defined solely by trauma. Marcus lost his apartment after depleting his settlement funds, but my parents refused to let him move home, forcing him to face consequences independently. This was perhaps the most significant change in our family dynamics. Mom and Dad finally requiring Marcus to solve his own problems. Without family support, Marcus spiraled further into addiction, but this rock-bottom experience seemed to trigger genuine introspection, creating the first real possibility of change. After being found unconscious behind a convenience store, Marcus entered a state-funded rehabilitation program. 1 year after the anniversary party that changed everything, our family exists in a new reality, fragmented but healing. I found purpose working part-time at a narcolepsy awareness organization founded in Zoe's memory while rebuilding my career. The organization focuses on medication safety and support for patients, turning tragedy into something potentially helpful for others. My relationship with Tyler has deepened into something honest and supportive, without the pretense that characterized our earlier bond. We meet weekly for coffee and check in by text almost daily, supporting each other through the ongoing family challenges. Tyler and Michelle welcomed a daughter and established healthy boundaries with the extended family, prioritizing their nuclear family's well-being while maintaining connections. They named their daughter Sophia, deliberately avoiding family names to symbolize their fresh start. Mom and Dad have entered couples counseling, slowly unpacking 40 years of enabling behaviors and communicating honestly for perhaps the first time in their marriage. Their therapist specializes in family trauma, helping them navigate their complicated feelings about Marcus. They sold the vacation home, the site of the fateful anniversary party, and downsized to a condo that represents their new, more authentic life chapter. The smaller space suits them better, and they've decorated it with mementos that celebrate their relationship rather than maintaining appearances. Marcus, after reaching rock bottom, entered a long-term long-term rehabilitation program of his own volition after a near-fatal overdose scared him into recognition of his problems. While I maintain distance, I've acknowledged his efforts through messages passed via Tyler. I'm cautiously optimistic, but unwilling to rush reconciliation without sustained evidence of change. The Patels have found a measure of peace through the Memorial Foundation established with the settlement funds, focusing on patient advocacy and medication safety. The foundation provides scholarships for students studying sleep disorders and patient safety, creating something positive from tragedy. On the anniversary of Zoe's death, all three of us siblings visited her grave separately. Marcus alone at dawn, Tyler with his infant daughter at midday, and me with Toby at sunset, each paying respects in our own way. The cemetery staff later told me they'd found fresh flowers all day, marking our independent pilgrimages. None of us pretend things will ever return to normal, but a different kind of family connection has emerged. One built on truth, accountability, and the recognition that protecting someone from consequences isn't the same as loving them. In our separate lives, each family member carries the lesson that secrets don't protect families, they destroy them from within.